Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. This is In the Roud, a folk song podcast, and I am your host, Matt Quinn. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. And now we're back with Season 5. I hope you've all had a lovely break over the summer, at folk festivals and whatever else you may have been doing. The weather is certainly colder now, so let's hunker down and dive into the next 10 songs in the Roud Index over the next 10 weeks. Just so you know, the songs covered in this season will be Roud 41, which is Child Ballad 58, Sir Patrick Spens; Roud 42, Child 62, Fair Annie; Roud 43, Child 63, Child Waters; Roud 44, Child 64, Fair Janet; Roud 45, Child 65, Bonnie Susie Cleland; Roud 46, Child 66, Lord Ingram and Child Wyatt; Roud 47, Child 68, Young Hunting; Roud 48, Child 75, Lord Lovell; Roud 49, Child 76, Lord Gregory; and Roud 50, Child 77, Sweet William's Ghost. Can't wait to get stuck into that lot. This podcast is proud to be partly sponsored by the Traditional Song Forum. Meeting regularly, both in person and online, the TSF provides a place for a variety of topics related to folk song, song collectors, singers, and many other aspects of folk song research to be presented and discussed. It's free to join, and most meetings are free to attend. So, discover more about the TSF at www.tradsong.org. That's www.tradsong.org. So let's get going. This week's song is Roud 41, Child Ballad 58, Sir Patrick Spens. Later on, we'll hear from our singer guest, James Fagan, but for now, let's have a look at the song's history with returning historical contributor David Atkinson. Well, hello and welcome back to In the Roud, David Atkinson. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? How's things?
Yeah, good.
Good. It's nice to see you. It's been a little while, hasn't it? You were in. This is the beginning of season 5. Can you believe it? And we had you on for, I think it was an episode in season 3. Hind Horn, I think you were on for, wasn't it?
I was on for Hind Horn, yes.
That's right. And so it's been a season and a bit since we last saw you, but it's lovely to have you back. And a fascinating one to discuss today. Roud 41, Child 58, Sir Patrick Spens. So what are we dealing with here? What's the give us a bit of a plot synopsis. What this is definitely it's a child ballad, so it's definitely a ballad rather than a lyrical song or anything, but give us a plot synopsis of Sir Patrick Spens.
Okay, well, at its simplest, the famous lines of the opening stanza: "The king sits in Dunfermline town, drinking the blood-red wine. Where will I get a good sailor to sail this ship of mine?" And then up speaks one of his courtiers and says, "Sir Patrick Spens is the best sailor that sails upon the sea." So the king writes to Sir Patrick, telling him basically that he's got to go on this sea voyage for the king. And Sir Patrick says, "Who has done this deed, this ill deed done to me, to send me out this time of year to sail upon the sea?" It's not a good time to go sailing. However, he has to obey. Make haste, my merry men all, our good ship sails in the morn." and one of his sailors says, "Oh, say nay, say that was don't say so, my master dear, for I fear a deadly storm." And then they get this famous image: late yestreen, I saw the new moon with the old moon in her arms, and I fear, my dear master, that we will come to harm. And then in the earliest version, it skips really straight to the shipwreck. So he's done his duty, and it doesn't turn out well. So the last stanza or two has the ladies waiting for their lords to come home, and of course they don't. It's half hour to Aberdour, it's 50 fathoms deep, and there lies good Sir Patrick Spens with the Scots lords at his feet.
Right. Yeah. So it's a little sort of a minor epic saga in a way.
Yes, yes. It's elaborated somewhat in some of the subsequent versions, but that's a summary of the earliest one, and the earliest version is found in Thomas Percy's Relics of Ancient English Poetry.
Oh, it's from there. It's one of the ones that's in there because
Yes, indeed.
that's come up a few times.
So published in 1765, and Percy says that it's given from two manuscript copies that he was sent from Scotland. Sent, it seems, to Percy by two of his Scottish friends, correspondents, David Dalrymple, Lord Hales, and another one called John McGowan. Various scholars have at various times suspected of both Percy and Dalrymple having a poetic hand in the ballad.
Right.
So they have some of the sort of literary expressions. I mean, this is not unusual in Percy's relics, but phrases such as Eldern Knicht, cork heel tune, and gold canes in their hair, those have been thought to be possible evidence of Percy's own proving hand, or indeed Lord Hales, who was also a literary figure.
Right, sure.
Childs himself seems to have doubted whether Percy ever really had two copies at all, or whether he was not just constructing a way of covering over his own editorial alterations.
Oh yeah, because version A in Child says Percy's relics given from two manuscript copies.
Yes, that's right.
So yeah, 1765 is how far back we can trace this song in any form. Has this been a particularly on the sort of in over history rather than in the sort of folk revival? Has this ended up being a relatively sort of widespread and popular song, or has this stayed relatively sort of restrained in its spread? If you see what I mean.
It's been not in the folky world, but essentially in the literary world. It's been one of the sort of standard texts of Scots ballad poetry. It's been anthologized many times. It was included in Arthur Quiller Couch's Oxford Book of English Verse as an example of well, he has a sort of section of anonymous poetry, which he kind of implies is sort of terribly ancient and at the root of English verse, which is obviously not really true in 1765. But it's been very highly regarded in literary circles, and I'm not in England, but I suspect that school kids in Scotland would come across it at school. Certainly in previous generations, I don't know about now.
Right, okay.
So we've got 1765, then we've got another printed text in 1769 in David Hurd's Ancient and Modern Scots Songs, which is essentially the same text as the Percy one, but the name of Sir Patrick Spens is changed to Sir Andrew Wood.
Oh.
Now, and there's another Andrew Wood text in the Mansfield manuscript, which is around the same sort of period, which was printed. It's in Child, but Child had it via Motherwell, not knowing the original source.
Oh yes, there we go. If anyone's following along with Child, there's version D at least. Yeah, Sir Andrew Wood is the best skipper that ever sailed the sea.
That's right, yes. Now, Sir Andrew Wood, and I've got a note about him somewhere or other. Percy had seen Wood's name in connection with the ballad, and he asked Dalrymple, who'd sent him a copy, if he could shed any light on it. And he also asked a chap called Richard Graham, who was a keeper in the Royal Library in Scotland, who said that he had the ballad from an old dowager lady at Blantyre, about which we don't seem to know anything at all. But this Richard Graham sort of indicated in a letter to Percy that he might have been responsible for substituting Sir Andrew Wood for Sir Patrick Spens.
Right.
Andrew Wood was a noted sea captain, died in 1515, who served King James III and King James IV of Scotland. And as Percy said, his history has nothing in common with the ballad. He says, as Wood was the most noted warrior of Scotland, it is probable that, like the Theban Hercules, he had engrossed the renown of other heroes.
Okay, yeah.
So he's basically an interloper. And I've made a note myself that Scotland, one might think, had by 1765 produced warriors who are much better known than Sir Andrew Wood.
Andrew Wood, yeah, of course, yeah.
I suspect that not many people have heard of.
Fair enough.
And
yeah,
interestingly, as I say, we get Andrew Wood in Hurd's 1769 book, but then his second edition, as it were, in 1776, he's reinstated Sir Patrick Spens. So I don't think we need to worry too much about Andrew Wood. However, we do need to worry about Sir Patrick Spens. Percy's sort of giving away that he hasn't really any evidence for any historical basis for it, but he was obviously reluctant to let go of that. So what he writes is, in what age the hero of this ballad lived, or when this fatal expedition happened that proved so destructive to the Scots nobles, I have not been able to discover. Yet I'm of opinion that their catastrophe is not altogether without foundation in history, though it has escaped my researchers. In the infancy of navigation, such as used the northern seas were very liable to shipwreck in the wintry months. Hence a law was enacted in the reign of James III, a law which was frequently repeated afterwards, that there be no ship freighted out of the realm with any staple goods for the feast of Simon's Day and Jude unto the feast of the purification of Our Lady called Candlemas. So basically, I presume that this is actually true. There was a statute by royal decree that you weren't to go to sea when it was stormy if you were going to lose anything of value, which I guess is pretty reasonable. When we get to Sir Walter Scott in the minstrelsy of the Scottish Border, he's finding that's Child 58H, we get a supposedly historical character starting to attach to the ballad.
Oh, here we go. Version H in Child. Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border 3, taken from 2 manuscript copies, collated with several verses recited by the editor's friend Robert Hamilton, Esquire.
Yeah. So Scott printed it in the third volume of his 1803 edition of Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border. That's actually his second edition of this, as the third in a section of historical ballads. But from the third edition, that's 1806, he gave it first place in the first volume, heading up the historical ballads. And Walter Scott, of course, was very keen to present ballads as integral to Scottish history, of literary history. His Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border was what I suppose nowadays would call a nationalist project in some respects, at any rate.
Sure.
And he has a head note which indicates that he set out to present what he calls a more complete copy of the song, the relics text. And if you glance at them in Child, you'll see that Scott's version runs to 26 verses, as opposed to the Percy Relics one, which is only 11 verses.
Oh, wow. Okay. Must be a fair bit of embellishment going on there then.
There's quite a lot of embellishment. We've got quite a bit more about the weather, and we've got a lot more about the purpose of the voyage. They're going to Norway. The Relics version doesn't say where they're going.
Oh, okay.
We don't really know any. The earliest version, we don't really know anything about the purpose of this ill-fated voyage. However, in the Scott version, we've got the king has written a broad letter, and to Norway, o'er the foam, to the king's daughter, a Norway, 'tis thou mun bring her home. Which it's fame and hame in Scots, but
oh yes, that's right.
So there's now a purpose to the voyage. They're going to fetch the king of Norway's daughter and bring her back, presumably to be married to somebody in Scotland. And then, so off they go, and we still get the stanza about the new moon, the old moon in her arms, a great image, centre of the ballad. But then we get a lot more about the shipwreck. They hadn't sailed a league, but barely free, when the lift grew dark and the wind blew loud, and girly grew the sea.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So in this one, I just realised, that we get the voyage to Norway. They hoist their sails on Monday morn with all the speed they may. They had landed in Norway upon a Woodens day, a Wednesday. And then they've been in Norway for a week, and the shipwreck is the voyage home.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we get, as you were saying, the shipwreck.
And we get this sort of balancing stanza, because at the beginning, this is in the Walter Scott version. At the beginning, you've got the king saying, "Where will I get a good sailor to sail my ship? Where will I get a skeely skipper to sail this new ship of mine?" And then, when the storm is breaking on them, Sir Patrick himself is saying, "Where will I get a good sailor to take the helm in hand till I get up to the tall topmast to see if I can spy land?" One of the sailors takes over the helm, and then he hadn't gone a step, but barely aimed to climb the mast, but he hasn't got very far when about flew out of our goodly ship, and the salt sea it came in. Basically, the ship sprang a leak, and they make efforts to stem the leak, but unsuccessfully. Still, the sea came in, and Leif, that's sort of loath, were the good Scots lords to wet their cork-heeled shoes. But
Oh yeah.
So the languor of the play was played. They whacked their hats aboon, so they didn't want to get their shoes wet. And the next thing they knew, they were up to their hats in water.
Wow.
Many was the feather bed that floated on the fane. Many was the good Lord's son that never more came home. And you've got then you go to the ladies waiting on the harbour side for their lords who they'll never see again. And it's 40 miles off Aberdeen, it's 50 fathoms deep. There lies good Sir Patrick Spens, the Scots lords at his feet. Notice that Aberdour in the Percy version has become Aberdeen in Scotland.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty extensive then, isn't it, that version? It's more than double what was in Percy.
Oh, yes, indeed. So Scott, in his head note in the Minstrelsy, says it's taken from 2 manuscript copies, collated with several verses, recited by the editor's friend, Robert Hamilton, and probably a certain amount of Walter Scott's own interpolation. But he was still forced to say, even with the assistance of common copy, that's referring to the relics, the ballad still seems to be fragment. And there's a scholar called Charles Zook who's done a fairly extensive textual analysis, which kind of confirms that the ballad in Minstrelsy was principally created out of the text from the relics with these couple of other manuscripts that Walter Scott.
I noticed in a different version, it's in version F in Child, which is another Motherwell manuscript one, from the recitation of Mrs. Thompson, in that Skipper Patrick, as he's known in that song, is Irish. I mean, his name's Patrick, so there's an Irish connection anyway. But nevertheless, that version actually states, but out then speaks an Irish knight sat by the king's right knee. Oh, it's not. Yeah, it's not. Patrick isn't the Irish knight. The Irish knight sits at the king's right knee and says, "Skipper Patrick is the best skipper that ever my eyes did see." The king has written a long letter and sealed it with his hand and sent it to Skipper Patrick, and the on the sand. But then, nevertheless, there's an Irish knight in that one as well as an interesting sort of addition to the landscape.
The knight, well, the knight who tells the king that Patrick is the best skipper is, it's a slightly sort of whether he's trying to stitch up Sir Patrick by sending him off to sea, I don't know. And I think that's the only one that mentions Irish, so I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a sort of slur on his character or what. Or I mean, it's possibly just by association that any ballad with somebody called Patrick in it has to have an Irish connection.
Well, maybe, you never know. I noticed that some of them have a different spelling of Spens, because what we're dealing with normally is Spens, Spens, and there are some where it's Spence, which is the word like the word pence, but with an S beginning as well. But I mean, it's basically the same thing.
It is the same thing, and I think Spens is probably the older sort of Scots form.
Yeah,
and the CE is perhaps a slightly anglicised form. I couldn't swear to that.
No, and Norroway is obviously Norway, but is Norroway itself an official kind of old way to say or pronounce Norway, or is it just in this ballad?
Oh, crumbs. I'll have to have a quick look in the Concise Scots Dictionary to tell you that. Which I have here.
There we go.
Yeah, no, it does seem to be an old Scots form of the word.
Oh, it's an old Scots Norway. Okay.
Yeah, well, it says here from the 1600s. It's been recorded.
Oh, there we go.
So yes, it is a Scots form of the word. Obviously, kind of obsolete now. But from a ballad point of view, of course, it gives you an extra syllable.
It does indeed, yes.
So, looking at the minstrelsy text, stanza 4, to Norroway, And if that was just to Norway, it would be a bit flat, wouldn't it?
Indeed, it would. Yes. And looking at other names, I mean, we noted there are 18 versions in Child, but as you get towards the tail end of that, they're all like a verse and a half or a handful of verses.
Yes,
Right, they're
yeah,
obviously all fragments, aren't they?
yes, that's right.
I noted that one of them, version N, is mentions the name is Earl Patrick Spens rather than Sir or Skipper.
Oh, right, yeah.
Lang Lang will his lady look with her baby in her arms, but she'll never see Earl Patrick Spens come walking up the Strand. But then all these fragments, they're a bit sort of tangential, aren't they, in a way, some of them?
Well, I think they are, but I mean, insofar as they're significant, they suggest that the ballad was familiar to people, but perhaps not from being sung or recited in its entirety. It
Yeah,
looks as if quite a lot of people have picked up sort of fragments of it.
because that version N says noted down from a female servant by Joseph
Yeah.
Robertson in 1829, and the one before it, version M from Buchan's Gleaning, noted from a very intelligent old man, which is not the most helpful of source
No,
citing, is it? But
that's, that's slightly patronising.
it is. Imagine if I quoted Vic Gammon, but just said learnt from a very intelligent old man. It wouldn't work, would it? So,
No.
not the most helpful citing of a source.
Yeah, but this that's possibly. I mean, I wouldn't want to make too much of this, but the fact that an anonymous old man kind of implies that perhaps he wasn't a particularly sort of prominent person, and then from a female servant, it suggests that, well, for want of a better term, sort of, the common people were exposed at least to sort of fragments of this.
Yeah, at least it was in the sort of knowledge,
The knowledge,
but
yeah.
not necessarily in the like in the
Not in, I think,
in usage,
yeah,
but in knowledge.
yeah, yeah, probably not what we would think of today as in the singing tradition of those sort of people.
Indeed. But yeah, so there's 18 in Child, and in Bronson we've got I did write down 12, the 12 different tunes in Bronson. I did have a look through these earlier. They're split into three groups. We've got Group A, Group B, and Group C. This is what Bronson, if anyone doesn't know, this is what Bronson did. He tended to lump the tunes that were similar together in groups so that it was easier.
Yeah,
So you'd say, yeah, this tune is Group A for Child 58. So, and Group A melody wise is essentially what Nick Jones found in Bronson, I think, and
yes,
you used it for his version, which is the one we'll discuss later in the episode with James. But
yeah.
if I sing a couple of them,
Yeah,
sorry, what were you going to say?
yeah, I'm just thinking that the evidence in Bronson suggests that there isn't really a sort of stable tune that's stuck with this ballad.
Right.
They're all a bit bitty, aren't they?
Yeah, certainly on the folk
And Nick
revival.
Jones, basically,
Yeah,
Nick Jones chose what he thought was the best one, and I think he was probably right.
quite possibly, and consequently, that's become the tune.
That's right. Yeah.
Although there is another one, but there are two other tune groups, but we'll come to that. I can try and citing some of these. I did have a go earlier, so they shouldn't be totally awful. Um, so actually, version 2 in Group A is more or less what Nick Jones sang note for note, I think. Ba ba dum bum bum ba da ba bum bum ba ba bum 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 ba da 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 dun da 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 dun 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 da 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 dun dun da 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 ya da da dun da 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 dun dun da 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 ya da dun da da da, which is pretty much follows exactly um what Nick Jones sang and other people. The king sat in Dunfermline town, drinking the blood red wine, Where shall I get a sailor bold to sail this ship of mine? And up there spake an elder knight, was sitting at the king's right knee. Sir Patrick Spens is the best sailor that sails upon the sea. And so there, but then if you go back one to the group to tune one in Child, it's kind of the same thing, but it's got extra bits in it. It's got the word "o" after every second line. So there has to be extra melody bits.
Oh
Drinking
yeah.
the blood red wine, "o." Which, people have wisely got rid of that. I'm all for getting rid of
Quite
"o"
right. Yes.
and getting rid of "and it's" from the beginning of lines. That's my bugbear in on focusing. I find "and it's" to be a particularly pointless phrase. It's merely there. Anyway, I'm not gonna moan about "and it's." This is not the time. But version one in Bronson, Christie sent to Christie's father from a gentleman in Morayshire, 1815. Ba ba dum da da dun 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 da da dun 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 da 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 dun da 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 dun dun da 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 da. So it's extra bit at the end of each second line, which is the king sits in Dunfermline town, a drinking the blood red wine. Oh, oh, where will I get a skeely skipper that will sail the salt seas fine? Oh, so it extends to this O business, which I'm
Yes.
not a fan of.
No, I don't like it. Certainly not in
But
not in
the rest is kind of the
Charlotte.
same. Uh, then up and spake an elder knight, sat at the king's right knee. Oh, Sir Patrick Spens is the best skipper that ever sailed on the sea. Oh, so yeah, that's got an extra bit. I'm quite glad that didn't come into popular use. The rest of
Yes.
Group A are kind of variations on a theme. Number seven's quite nice. From Norfolk in Vancouver, sort of American one. Well, Canada rather. Beg your pardon, Vancouver. Sung by George H. Tucker, 1936, from his grandmother of Queen Anne's County, and it's the same kind of thing, but it's in a sort of whether it's upbeat or not. But it, from reading on the page, seems to be a slightly jaunty 6/8 sort of jig time. Bum bum ba da da yum ba dum ba ya da dum da ya da dum da dum da yum ba ya da da. So that ends up being the king sat in Dunfermline town. I'll keep singing a flattened seventh. Not that you've noticed, but da 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 da, which is an American thing, really. The king sat in Dunfermline town, a drinking the blood red wine. Oh, where I'll get a skeely skipper to sail this heart of this. I've been singing too many romantic songs. To sail this ship of mine, this heart of mine, sail this ship of mine. So that you end up with a slightly jauntier sort of feel to it there. But that's Canadian. And again, going back one, number six in is Sir Patrick Spens, 1937, from Knoxville, Tennessee. Da 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 da. The king sits in Dunfermline town, a drinking his blood red wine. Sir Patrick Spens is the best sailor that ever sailed on the brine. That to me is a
Hmm.
much more sort of stereotypically American sort of traditional tune
Yeah.
melody, sort of slightly pentatonic, it's missing the major or minor, the third of the scale in that one at least. But it's still reminiscent of that, the one that Nick Jones picked and ran with. And then there's Group B is just versions 10 and 11. What have we got? Lanarkshire, so Scotland, 1818. Group B. The king sits in Dunfermline town, drinking the blood-red wine. Oh, oh, where will I get a steely skipper to sail this ship of mine? And there's extra melody, but I'm not sure how it fits the words. But that's got a remarkably different feel to it.
That sounds a bit like the tune to something else, but I can't immediately think what.
Yeah, so it reminded me of something as well, but I couldn't place it. And then version 11, which is the other one in Group B, says sung by Ewan MacColl. So it's the Ewan MacColl tune, which is more or less that one. The king sits in Dunfermline town, a drinking at the wine, and he has called for the finest skipper. I started this too low. Skipper in Fife and all the land. So essentially, there's possibly a third, but two key sort of tunes or tune variants. One of which is the one that Nick Jones ran with, and the other one people will know it's the one that Ewan MacColl sang. So those are the two kind of tune groups really, and the two most common versions of. So, but as you said, not it doesn't seem to be a set melody particularly. Anything else you want to say about this, or we can move on to what little there is to talk about in terms of field recordings?
Well, yes, there is. We were talking about the Walter Scott's minstrelsy of the Scottish Border version and how it sort of extends the ballad. And what Scott brings into it is the idea of a historical character concerning the destination and the purpose of the voyage, as well as this sojourn in Norway. And secondly, a certain realism or quasi-realism, at any rate, about the mechanics of the shipwreck, including measures to try and save the vessel from sinking. So Scott says, cause of Sir Patrick Spens's voyage pointed out distinctly, and it shows that the song has claim to high antiquity, as referring to a very remote period in Scottish history. And now remember that Scott is publishing this in 1803, so that's only 40 years after our first sighting of it in Percy's Relics. And by no stretch of the imagination does 40 years count as a very remote period of history. And I think this is important as to how and why the ballad has become this sort of iconic piece of Scots literature, if you like. Scott himself favoured a connection with events around the marriage of the so-called Maid of Norway, the granddaughter and heir to the Scottish King Alexander III, although he was forced to concede that there's no trace of any shipwreck historical records. So the field became wide open for subsequent commentators to try to pin down the ballad to an actual event of high antiquity. And there's four different possibilities that have been proposed in chronological order. And I don't want to bore people with sort of historical dates and so forth. But as I say, I think it is important that this idea of historical antiquity has attached to a ballad that, to the best of our knowledge, is really not that old at all, or relatively speaking, not that old at all. So I'll just go through these. First, in 1281, a marriage was contracted between Margaret of Scotland, the daughter of Alexander III, King of Scotland, and Eric II, King of Norway. Margaret crossed over to Norway for her wedding, escorted by a train of Scottish nobles, many of whom were then drowned on their voyage home to Scotland. Secondly, in 1283, Margaret of Scotland died in Norway, possibly in childbirth, and her daughter, also confusingly called Margaret, known as the Maid of Norway, became heir presumptive to the Scottish throne in 1284. So following the death of Alexander III in 1286, Margaret, this is Margaret the Maid of Norway, her claim was recognised, and Scottish nobility took steps to secure her grandfather's wish that she be married to a son of the English king, Edward I. Eventually, 1289, Edward I provided financial assistance to Eric II of Norway, thus paving the way for a formal proposal for a marriage between Margaret and the English king's son, Edward, Prince of Wales, who later became Edward II. Margaret sailed from Norway in September 1290, accompanied by 2 Norwegian bishops, but fell ill on the voyage and died in Orkney, while the Scots had gathered at Scone to await her arrival. Then the third possibility, the kings of Scotland regularly sat at Dunfermline during the period before about 1400, and this is why the king sits in Dunfermline town in the ballad. And the Spens clan was a branch of the Macduffs in that region, and that suggests the possibility of a basis in political feuding at the time. Certainly the opening lines of the king sits in Dunfermline town drinking the blood red wine hark back to a time when the Scottish kings and queens resided there. And Percy, actually in the second edition of Percy's Relics, he added a note identifying Aberdour, which is named in the final stanza of the Relics version, as a harbour, which was not far from Dunfermline. And then jumping ahead a wee bit in history, our fourth possibility, in September 1589, following her proxy marriage to James VI, King of Scotland, the previous month, and of Denmark. This is James VI, who is James I of England. So this is somebody we vaguely have heard of. Following his proxy marriage to Anne of Denmark, the younger daughter of the Danish King Frederick II, she failed to arrive in Scotland as expected, and rumours of disaster circulated until a message was eventually received that she'd been driven back by contrary winds and had taken refuge in Oslo. At which point, James determined to take ship himself in order to fetch his new queen, to commit it as a historian has written in rather romantic prose, to commit himself and his hopes Leander-like to the waves of the ocean, all for his beloved hero's sake. Now, given James's homosexual proclivities, I can't be too sure about that, but as a political marriage, it's quite important. Anyway, accompanying the king on the voyage was one Sir Patrick Vorse, or Van, Lord Baron Vanbarrock, one of the ambassadors who had negotiated the marriage contract and who was now a witness to the marriage ceremony when it took place in Norway in 1589. King James's expedition was undertaken in stormy weather and caused consternation in Scotland. Although such storms were a normal occurrence, they were rapidly blamed on witchcraft in both Denmark and Scotland. The episode was a factor in the growth of the witch panic in early modern Scotland, and King James himself was a great believer in witches. He was responsible for quite a lot of unsavoury developments there. That's all quite beside the point, but it does suggest that the voyages of King James VI and I have a claim to a place in popular imagination. Anyway, scholars have enjoyed themselves tracing these things. There are definitely echoes, but no real hard evidence that ballads anything like as old as that.
Yeah, it seems from what you've said, it seems to be, sort of the shipwreck from one period, the name Sir Patrick from another story, and this idea that one of the marriages from somewhere else. It's all sort of combined into one into one sort of, in quotes, definitive version almost.
Yeah, yes. I mean that's right. And the real strands of evidence are a shipwreck and a marriage, which are not uncommon things by
Indeed, indeed.
any means.
But then, yeah, and not common at all, really, on the oral tradition side of things. It doesn't appear to be, certainly in the oral tradition of, let's say, of when the folk song collecting period of, say, Bering Gould through to the 1960s, let's say. It's, you can barely find this song at all.
That is correct.
I mean, the recordings I've found, one is uh, a Scots storyteller singer called Duncan Williamson, who was a member of the Scottish Traveller community. Although there's debate, but there's he is there. Hamish Henderson apparently once referred to Duncan Williamson as possibly the most extraordinary tradition bearer of the whole Traveller tribe. Whether we believe Hamish Henderson or not, another matter. He was good though. We like Hamish Henderson, I suppose. But then Duncan Williamson did sing a version of Sir Patrick Spens, and it's on a veteran CD. It's called "Put Another Log on the Fire: Songs and Tunes from the Scots Traveller," 1994 veteran CD. There's another Scots singer, Jock Duncan, from New Deer in Aberdeenshire, but then apparently he learnt it from Duncan Williamson. So there's not, we can't, it's anyone attempting to trace this song back through whatever in quotes traditional singer versions we've got. We're not sure about Duncan Williamson's provenance for this one, and Jock Duncan learned it from Duncan Williamson. Vic Gammon and I discussed Ray Driscoll a couple of seasons ago. There was a whole weird discussion. I think it was actually on a Patreon episode, so a lot of people didn't hear it. We did an episode on a song and the subject of what is a traditional singer, what makes a traditional singer came up. And the whole thing about these traditional singers learning, they learned songs from anywhere. They didn't just learn them from other old people or other people of their generation. They learned things from books and from broadsides and broadsheets. And Ray Driscoll, for this one, he did sing Sir Patrick Spens. It was recorded by Gwilym Davis, and it came out on a posthumous album of recordings of Ray Driscoll called Wild Wild Berry in 2008. But the sleeve notes for this say, Ray learnt the tune, not the words. Ray learnt the tune from a Scottish fellow worker during World War II. The singer told him that the tune was Sir Patrick Spens, but could not provide any words, so Ray found the words in a printed source. And the tune is basically the same as that sung by Ewan MacColl. So even the few and far between traditional versions we have don't give us much information about, or you can't really trace it apart from those three. I found an extra one on the Keister Rich's site for Scott stuff, but it's just a discussion. It's in Orkney, but it says discussion of the ballad Sir Patrick Spens with some recited fragments. A guy called James Henderson, recorded by Alan J. Bruford, and yeah, there's an actual recording there, but it's just a discussion of the song with a handful of recited fragments. So again, and not much to go on really if you're looking for oral tradition versions of this song. It's a bit sparse, shall we say?
Yeah. James Madison Carpenter collected it in Scotland in 1929.
Oh yeah.
It was the first ballad he collected in Scotland, apparently. He collected it from a chap called James Masson, who was known as Black Jimmy, on the seafront at Stonehaven on Christmas Eve. And this is Carpenter's recollection of the event. Stiff breeze coming in from sea, setting breakers against seawall in great foam-crested seas and spray, and yellow spume drifting high over the town like snowstorm. Noise terrific. Then in a little black creosoted fisherman's hut with the dictaphone set on the end of a cask and a foot placed against the window shutter to save the guttering candle from the storm, in the flickering candlelight and above the roar of a December gale, he recorded Sir Patrick Spens.
Wow.
And he collected...
there's quite a few names I can see. I've just filtered the Roud Index by the James Madison Carpenter manuscript collection.
Yes,
and there's 13 entries, but there's quite a few different names. We got Peter Christie, Bethia Fowley, Watson Gray, Mrs. Watson Gray, beg your pardon, James Masson, Mrs. William Matheson, Alexander Robb. There's a handful of different names, and then Black Jimmy as well, James Masson.
Yeah. So he got it from quite a few people.
Indeed, but that's just manuscript rather than recordings.
We'd have to check if he actually.
I don't
know. There are because from that description he said he had the dictaphone.
Oh, okay. Set. I must be misreading something somewhere, but yes.
But there's probably no more than a verse or two on Carpenter's recordings.
Yeah, they're going to be pretty almost unlistenable.
They tend to be pretty fragmentary and unlistenable. It's quite important in the sense that it was evidently was known at that time, and this is the end of the 1920s, the 1930s. I still suspect that at that time it may have been known partly through the education system in Scotland, where ballads were taught in schools in a way that's certainly not true in England.
Indeed. But so there's it's a very interesting song, this one, in a few different ways.
Quite a few scholars have suspected that it's in some, what I've written is in some sense a literary piece, and I put note to a variety of people. At one time, Robert Chambers, who was an early literary scholar in Scotland, argued that it was probably the work of Lady Wardlaw, who wrote the sort of verse epic Hardy Canute. That's been challenged, and it's sometimes called the Lady Wardlaw heresy. But the suspicion that that it was kind of written as a literary piece doesn't seem to go away.
Yeah.
It does appear in a couple of chapbooks in the 19th century. Cheap print.
Oh yeah, I found some mentions of some songsters in the Roud Index. In Edinburgh, basically in Edinburgh, and in the Vocal Magazine, Volume 1, 1797, and Volume 4, 1799.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing.
So it's not the least. It's just one of these ones that I guess has. In terms of looking at the history of it, in terms of the public knowledge of the history of the song and the oral tradition, it's not that commonly found. But as we've had with a few songs on the podcast so far, all you need is one, really well-known person on the folk revival to find a version, perform it, have a hit with it, and consequently, everyone knows about this song now. Sir Patrick Spens is famous. The ballad is famous throughout the folk scene, basically because of Nick Jones and then Martin Carthy, and so it's one of these ones that, not that well known in the sort of pre-folk revival, and then suddenly spread like wild. This one version is effectively spread like wildfire.
Yes, that's right, and of course, to people of my generation who came to folk song sort of via Fairport Convention, I think we should mention their version.
Oh yes, I'll definitely talk about that with James as well later on. That Fairport version is rather key as well.
I think so, and that, I'm told, is uses pretty much the tune that Ewan MacColl sang for the ballad Hughie the Grime.
Oh, okay, so they've just taken a different song melody from Ewan
Yeah,
and
I've got that information from Brian, so
Brian Peters. There we go. Yeah,
credit to him.
always trust Brian. He has good he
Yes,
has good
quite.
knowledge. Good knowledge.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, I think we'll leave things there for this one.
Okay.
This has been, really fascinating and a great way to kick off season 5 of the podcast. We haven't got anything in the diary for you in the rest of this season, or in fact in the next season, I think. But I think the next time, I won't say what the song is, but I think we've got something in for you to come back in a couple of seasons' time. Otherwise, thanks very much for doing this and coming on. This is your time and knowledge is very much appreciated in these matters.
Pleasure. Very enjoyable.
And hope to see you at some point in the flesh at some point. I know there's a conference or two coming up, isn't there? I think somewhere around the place.
I think there's something in October.
Oh, is that in Gloucester? Is that the one in Gloucester?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, I'll try and make that one, I think.
I'll try and make it.
Yes, but otherwise, lovely to see you. And David Atkinson, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
A huge thanks again to David Atkinson for providing us with the history of Sir Patrick Spens. As ever, at this, the halfway point in the episode, we're going to listen to a few different versions of this song sung by traditional singers. As David and I discussed, it hasn't really turned up in oral tradition that much, but we do have a couple of recordings for you. In fact, they are the same version sung by two different people. One sung by Jock Duncan, and then sung by the man from whom Jock Duncan learned the song, Duncan Williamson.
The king sits in Dunfermline, drinking his mullidred wine, spearing far like a dusky skipper. It'll sail the sad seas fine. Up did Spick an eldrin night, and sat at the king's reckoning. Oh, Sir Patrick Spens is the finest skipper that ever sailed the sad sea. The king then wrote a bread letter and sent it with his right hand, and he sent it to Sir Patrick Spens when he was sailing on the strand.
Oh, the king, he said, send Dunfermline. He's a drinking the blood red wine. He said, where shall I find a skilly skipper for to sail this fine ship o' mine? Then up and speaks an old eldry knight, wha sits by the king's right knee. He said, Sir Patrick Spens is the finest sailor that ever did sail the sea. So the king he takes his quill in hand, and in the letter he did say, you maun tak this to Sir Patrick Spens. You maun tak it right away. Oh, the first words that Sir Patrick read, oh, a loud laugh laughed he, and the next words Sir Patrick read, Oh, a tear, it blended his ear.
And you can find the links to those tracks and the albums from which they came in the show notes. On to the second half of the episode. To chat more about Sir Patrick Spens, and other things besides, I was joined for this episode by singer and instrumentalist James Fagan. Well, hello and a big welcome to In the Roud, James Fagan. Hello.
Thank you, Matt Quinn. It's a delight to finally be joining you. Well, I say finally. You are in the. You're still at base camp 0 in terms of the Roud numbers, but we are delighted to have a mutual interest in ballads, aren't we? And a mutual interest in talking about them on radio. It must be said.
Indeed, so of course, because you are one of the two hosts of Thank Goodness It's Folk, the Sheffield radio show. Which yes, I have been a guest on a few times. And I guess we are still base 0 with In the Roud. I worked it out the other day, based on about a month and a half ago, the number that Steve Roud gave me for the total number of songs in the Roud Index, 47,566. And I worked out that, not including this episode, because technically it's not done yet, there's 40 songs on the podcast and a further 24 on the Patreon. So 64 songs. I've covered 0.13% of the Roud Index.
Well, congratulations. That does seem significant. And I'll tell you in return, since we're talking numbers, that Sam Hindley and myself took on a much easier challenge than you, which was to talk about and play at least one recording of, where possible, and a new recording, as commissioned, of each of the 305 ballads published in Francis James Child. A much easier task. We are up to 188 out of 305. It's taken us 4 years to get there.
Wow.
I thought it might take us 6 years to complete the Child ballads if we played one every week for 52 weeks a year, but we don't broadcast in the summer. So I worked out we've been averaging 45 a year, and we're sort of in the late 180s with ours. But I've been watching and listening to the In the Roud with great interest, and I was absolutely delighted that you asked me to talk about Sir Patrick Spens, which is a song which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. I don't want to jump the gun, but a song I've only recently started singing, and but I'm thrilled to be singing it.
Indeed. Although, In the Roud has a much easier job than you in a way, because with the Child ballads, you've got about, 35 Robin Hood ballads in a row to kind of cope with?
I must admit, as the show's founder, Dave Eyre, predicted when I told him about our project, he said, if you manage to play a recorded version of every one of the Robin Hood ballads, I will be greatly surprised, and I suspect that you will end up racing through that section. And that's exactly what happened, Matt.
Okay, there we go. Because the first time we come to any in the Roud Index will be Roud's 70, 71 and 72. There's 3 in a row, and they're broken up by being the last episode of season 7 and the first 2 episodes of season 8.
There you go.
And then there's none for at least the next sort of 15, 20 seasons.
Well, there you go. You get a break from Robin Hood. We didn't, so we had to flash our way through it.
Oh, did you? Okay. Well, I did. For Carl Sinfield's Sing Yonder project, I did do a new setting of Robin Hood and Queen Catherine, which no one else sings. So I was quite pleased with that one. See, if you haven't done that one already, but you probably skimmed past it, but that's fine. Anyway, that's not why we're here. We're talk about Sir Patrick Spens. Start us off with a bit of James Fagan music history. Tell us a bit about yourself and your musical upbringing and your how and when you got into folk music.
Sure. Well, I didn't have to try too hard because I grew up in a house surrounded by it. My mum and dad, my dad's English, his name's Bob Fagan, and he was taken out to Australia at the age of 10 as a 10-pound pom. And by the time he was at university in Canberra, he was getting interested in the folk revivals, not only of Australia, but of England and America particularly, which influenced heavily the new folk revival scene that was going on in Australia, which was sort of trying to keep up through buying records and listening to things on the radio, I suppose. So there was a burgeoning what we would recognise as a sort of an Anglo-American / Australian, new colonial Australian folk scene in Canberra in the late 1960s and early 1970s, which is where my mum Margaret met my dad. Margaret, my mum, is from Tasmania, and she was already interested in music greatly and singing, although she wouldn't have been exposed to that much folk music until she started going to folk clubs and with my dad and going to hearing folk music in Canberra in the developing folks scene there. So I was born in Canberra in 1972, and my parents quickly moved to Sydney when my dad got a job in a university in Sydney called Macquarie. He's a geographer. And he moved to Sydney with me and mum, and my sister came along about a year later, and she was born in Sydney. So we were the kind of stereotypical nuclear family, son and daughter, who sang from a pretty early age in harmony with our mum and dad. And from a pretty early age, me and my sister were up on stage singing harmonies with my parents. It seemed like a perfectly natural and normal thing to do. And we were doing that from a very early age. So by the time I was about 9 or 10, I'd been learning piano and I'd been singing in school choirs and stuff, but I was also already, by the age of about 10 or 11, I was getting up on stage at folk clubs in the Sydney area and singing with my parents and getting used to singing in public and all of that. And then I also, in high school, I decided I wanted to get some proper music under my belt, so I learned some more piano and a bit of clarinet, but I really started to fall in love with the guitar. So I was always a singer. So through all of high school, I was singing in various school groups, a kind of a jazz a cappella ensemble, and I was singing in school musicals, and I was singing in choirs. And then outside of school, I was singing folk with my family, and we were performing at folk festivals. And by then, really, at that stage, I was just singing what repertoire my parents were coming up with, which was largely, like a lot of revival singers, it was stuff that they had heard in circulation from the records they could get hold of and the tapes that they'd been given by friends and all of those things. And I didn't really get at that point, I guess, the depth of the research that I would end up witnessing around me in my very home some 40 years later. I think that music at that point for me, there was a less distinction between all the different types of music. I was just singing lots of kinds of music, but I was aware that there was a distinction between the kinds of scenes that were in operation, and the folk scene definitely was different to all the other music genres that I'd been involved in. So for me, the folk scene was this comfortable, friendship-based sort of family network thing that was going on outside the competitive kind of exam-based musics I'd seen, and the kind of the rock stuff that was happening at my school that I was just not too cool enough to be allowed to participate in. I was allowed to turn up to their rehearsals. I was allowed to carry their bags for them, but I wasn't really allowed to play the guitars through the big amplifiers. So I just wasn't that cool. So, all of that is a long way of getting around to the fact that then in my late teens, I really started to get a huge interest in Irish music and the bouzouki particularly, and through my dad and mum's collection, really the records that stood out to me were the Planxty records, and I really got into that. At the same time, I was listening to a lot of things like Martin Carthy, Ewan McCall and Peggy Seeger, Roy Bailey, and these were people I also got I was very lucky enough to meet people like Peggy Seeger and Roy Bailey because they came and stayed with my folks. My parents were by then quite active members of the Sydney and the broader Australian folk scene. And so they were sort of on a fairly short list of safe houses for touring UK folkies. And by the time I was in my late teens, it was quite normal to have visiting folk luminaries like Roy and Peggy staying at my house, and I got to talk to them a lot. To cut this very long story a little bit shorter, I would say that I was also an academically oriented person at that age, and I was gunning it for being a doctor, and I was a keen student. I went to medical school straight from high school, and during those 6 years I spent at Sydney University studying medicine, I started playing I was already playing with the Fagans, but I started playing Irish music in bands as well, and with Alistair Hewlett, the great Scottish Australian singer-songwriter. So I was touring with a couple of bands in my holidays, and so by the time I got to final year medicine and really should have been looking at the beginning of my medical career, my music had really taken me to a place where it was a major distraction. And clearly something that was going to be a crossroads I was going to have to face fairly quickly. That crossroads was rather what would we say? The decision was sort of taken out of my hands by fate when I came here in 1995 in the winter to meet up with mutual friends in the folk scene and to see Roy and come to Sheffield, funnily enough, where I've ended up living. Roy was the first contact I really had when I came over here, and I visited he and Val and met Kit and David in Sheffield. But I also went and visited Eliza Carthy and Martin and Norma in their house in Robin Hood's Bay, where I was introduced to Nancy Kerr. And a few weeks after that, Nancy and I had already started singing together. And by the time I finished that what was supposed to be a brief holiday here, and was supposed to be going back to resume my life as a Sydney GP trainee, I was madly in love with Nancy. I was madly in love with the English folk scene. I was also really delighted to have had my ears open in those months I was here to the English music that I hadn't known as much about. I knew about the Watersons. I knew about Roy Bailey. I knew about Leon Rosselson. I didn't have as much knowledge as I had about the Irish scene at that point. And meeting Nancy and hearing Northumbrian music and hearing music in Yorkshire just really opened my ears to all of that stuff. So about a year after that, I'd done my internship in Australia. I came back to England. Nancy and I started making records together. My music gigs went up and my medical gigs went down. I stopped taking locums. I finally came home one day from hospital, realised I'd lost my stethoscope, and the point that I realised that I didn't seem too bothered about the fact that I'd lost my stethoscope because I didn't think I was going to need it much was probably the moment I realised that I was a musician and not a doctor. Fast forward 30 years, and I am still a folk musician. I still am with Nancy Kerr. We sing together. We've made lots of records, and we have two musical kids, Hamish and Harry, who are inadvertently following in our footsteps, although we haven't made them join a family folk band. They've kind of done that of their own accord. And what else have I done? For the last 12 years, I've been broadcasting with Sam Hindley on Thank Goodness It's Folk, and over the last 4 years, particularly taken an interest in child ballads and how they have been approached, mainly in the revival, but also where we can, like yourself, digging into as many source recordings as we can and seeing what people have done with the ballads over those years. And that broadcasting that I do is on Sheffield Live, and it's become really, really important to me. It was a touchstone for me and Sam during lockdown, and it's kept us going, and it's made me a lot of connections and a lot of friends. And so my daily life these days is the father of two kids, helping support Nancy's academic career. I'm an agent for myself, for Melrose Quartet, for my duo with Nancy, and for now with a trio with Tim Van Eycken. And I've just formed a bouzouki trio with Benji Kirkpatrick and John Doran. And I make a radio program and wash up.
Yeah, that's an important part of a day-to-day life.
So there you go. That's my life to this point.
Yes, and one duo gig with me as well.
And a gig with Matt Quinn, yes, in 2025.
That's right.
Breaking new territory and new ground.
That was probably the most last-minute gig I've ever done in my life.
Well, I just knew I could turn to you, and you came through.
That's right. That was,
and in fact, we sang Sir Patrick Spens.
We did, didn't we? That's right. You and Nancy had a gig in Bath, and Nancy was ill. And
That's right.
I was meant to be looking after your boys for the night, but you knew I was going to be free because you knew where I was going to be. So you rang me and said,
"Yeah,
here's an amusing idea.
Yes,
do you want to come to Bath and do a gig?" So we, with almost no rehearsal, we did a duo gig, which was enormously entertaining.
Indeed, it was. And I just want to say that I did it. My last section just sounded like a huge bit of name dropping, but that is the truth of what happened to me, Matt. And those are the people I met, and that's just they are those people I mentioned are the reason I met Nancy, and they're the reason I'm here. So that's why I talk about them when I'm asked about my musical history, because they're so much a part of it, and that is something I love about the folk scene.
Yeah, well, that's similar with me as well, because I grew up with it and with the music, and I grew up going to a relatively local folk club, and
that's right. That's
probably where I sort of met you, was through your Nancy visits to the Royal Oak Folk Club in Lewes, I think.
Indeed.
On a Thursday night, and and then I moved to Sheffield and became even better friends, and and here we are today. Right, Sir Patrick Spens. Then that's why we're here. So tell us, do you have a particular memory of this song first arriving in your brain, or first time you ever heard it?
The first memory I have of this song is an anecdote that my dad used to regularly repeat, which is that apparently there was some competition one year to see who could come up with the most succinct summary of the longest ballad. And this anecdote goes around, and in my mind, Martin Carthy won the competition with his summary of Sir Patrick Spens, which was allegedly done like a football score. Basically, it was Ocean 1, Sir Patrick Spens 0. And that's the first time I ever heard of this song. My dad talking about that joke, about that anecdote. So in my mind, I just had it down as this kind of a song about clearly a noble, a sir, with a great name, and I knew he drowned, but I didn't know the song, and I didn't. One of the reasons I didn't know the song is that we didn't actually have this. We had a lot of folk records, we had a lot of vinyl, but we didn't have sort of a key number of the very early releases, particularly the leader trailer stuff. It just hadn't been that widely available in Australia. So we didn't have, for example, trailer record 2014, which is Nick Jones's debut album, which phenomenally, and still blows my mind, this opens with Sir Patrick Spens. This is the opening track on Nick Jones's debut solo record.
I know, I feel the same way about I Saw Her Standing There by the Beatles. It's album 1, track 1.
I know.
They knock it out of the park, you know.
Knock it out of the park, Matt. So I hadn't really heard it. I suppose the first time I became aware of this was probably seeing Martin Carthy singing it solo, and I imagine that happened in Australia on one of his tours, and I think that's probably where I first heard it. I think my parents subsequently got hold of some tapes of the early Nick Jones material. And, you know, it's funny about how worried we used to be about people taping, making tapes of records, that this was bad for artists. And how little did we know then?
Indeed.
How ubiquitous sharing of music would become, but also how valuable even those tapes made of Nick Jones's early albums were, for the reasons which I'm sure I've come up on this program before, connected with the ownership of the copyright of the leader trailer catalogue, which we won't go into because we don't want to be here for any more time than we have to be talking about other things than Sir Patrick Spens.
Indeed, and we don't want to spend the time moaning either.
We don't. So I probably first heard it sung by Martin Carthy, but the version that had the most impact on me was when I first heard Nick Jones sing it, and his version, as you know, and as you've spoken about with David in the first half, is so popular, and it's become so ubiquitous that I think it's one of the nice things about you asking me to do this was, and also having looked at this on our child ballad sequence on Thank Goodness It's Folk, was to try and remember that this song exists outside that particular version. And you talked quite a bit about the multitude of versions that Child collected and the multitude of versions that Bronson collected tune-wise. And you talked a bit about how Nick Jones's version, recorded in about 1969, released in 1970, became so important. And it is important to me. And it's interesting to reflect on why. I think, first of all, we can't take away from the fact that Nick Jones is a phenomenal interpreter of song, but he's also a phenomenal popular musician. So he manages to combine. It's interesting you mentioned the Beatles, because I think, for folkies, these early Nick Jones albums have the same status. He was incredible, and his interpretation of Sir Patrick Spens is just too good for someone that young to have done. What's interesting for me about the early Nick Jones records is that Sir Patrick Spens sort of stands out a little bit from them, amongst some early attempts to find his voice, if you like, and to decide on what kind of singer he wanted to be. Because he didn't really settle on that until a bit later on. But when you listen to Sir Patrick Spens, there's something about his version that I think he probably would say that he was very proud of how he sung that. And it was clearly something he felt very strongly about, because he opened his debut album with it as a statement of intent, which would go on to define the next 11 years of his singing career before his accident in the early 1980s. So, it's an astonishing recording. And as such, it's not a song that I ever thought I would attempt to learn, because I would only have wanted to sing his version if I sang it. And over the next sort of 20 years after becoming aware aware of his version. I saw artist after artist cover it. And I do say cover in this instance because that's essentially what those versions are. You can dress it up as doing a bit more research here and there. You can find alternative phrases or words. But if you were singing it with that meter and the rhythm and the style of Nick Jones that he put on that first record, you are essentially covering Nick Jones's version. And I have no problem with that. And I hold my hand up and say that my version is essentially a cover of the Nick Jones version in the same way. And I think some artists feel that they have to justify that and say, oh, and, I have a vague memory of once hearing Nick Jones sing it, but then, of course, I went out and I don't buy that. I think that, it's if you hear Nick Jones sing a song and it makes that impact on you and 20 years later you record it and you record this tune you learned from Nick Jones, just say that. Just say you learnt it from Nick Jones. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's totally acceptable for us to do that. And I have this discussion with my students a lot. Don't learn all of your songs from revival artists. Don't learn just one after another, and certainly don't just wholesale take their arrangements and chords. But, they had source singers they listened to, and we have source singers we listen to, and some of our source singers happen to be younger than others. That is how I think the music has been transmitted from one person to another, and I think it's perfectly healthy as long as you engage with the song. And I think that's one of the reasons it take me a long time to come around to recording or thinking about this song is how to engage with it beyond just singing Nick Jones's version. And that's really what I've tried to do. The inspiration for me learning it, Matt, was actually hearing June Tabor talk about the song. When I interviewed her on Thank Goodness It's Folk, Sam and I talked to her about her obsession with child ballads and her love of ballads. And it was actually something she said about Sir Patrick Spens. We were talking about all sorts of songs, but it was her description of the cinematic and filmic qualities of this particular story that really it made me stop and think about it as a piece of literature as well as a song, and to think about the actual mechanics of the story as well as just the fact that it is an astonishingly good tune and an astonishingly good bit of singing by Nick Jones. So with your permission, I'd just like to play an excerpt to the listeners of June Tabor when I asked her about Sir Patrick Spens.
Just the way the song unfolds is, well, the best of ballads are, to me, the musical equivalent of cinema. This is a film. Absolutely. The way it's set up it doesn't give the whole story. It's kind of there's certain episodes, and then you cut to, so it's the king on his throne. I need someone to take the ship to Norway, and then you cut to Sir Patrick Spens, and I see that very much like it's almost Lawrence of Arabia, but on the Scottish coast. It's a man walking almost aimlessly on the sand, and then right in the distance he sees something. What is it? He waits. It's a horse. He waits again. It's got a rider. This rider seems to have purpose. And eventually it rides. The rider comes up to him and he hands him a letter. It's a letter from the king. It's a letter he didn't want to receive. This man is Sir Patrick Spens. That's how I introduced the song.
Oh, I've got goosebumps, and Sam does as well. I can actually see the hair standing up on his arm.
Yeah, and then the way that its tempers are lost. How dare you say we just come here and spent the Queen's money? Like, we're sailing. And at so many points in ballads, it is a moment of anger that turns the story. And it's full of human emotions, of people doing the wrong thing. And then the wreck itself, when he says suddenly there's a hole in our ship's side, and there's just the awfulness of that moment. As you can just see it all. You can see the water pouring in through the ship's side and the desperate attempts to try and stem the flow. And then it cuts again to those waiting on shore. I mean, if that isn't a film, I don't know what is. Absolutely magnificent. And then finally, with the image of the ship on the seafloor.
Yeah.
Oof,
It's
I must be.
extraordinary. Hearing you describe that has been one of the, I can tell you, one of the highlights of our 3 years of running this segment, June. So, Matt, I think you can see why I wanted to play you that, and for our listeners to hear it, because I think it's a profoundly important moment in my life hearing June talk about that song. I think that during that conversation with June Tabor, I started to really challenge what it is I get out of singing and what it is I extract from it, and why any of us are interested in these songs. And I have to say that as a player of rhythmic instruments, and as a chord player, and as a person who likes melody, I was first attracted to Sir Patrick Spens, without a doubt, by the tune. And I was attracted to it by Nick Jones's singing and his guitar playing. And, you know, the fate of Sir Patrick Spens was of little interest to me in a way. It's an archaic story about a fictitious, possibly fictitious incident that may or may not be loosely connected to somebody trying to, basically kidnap the princess of Norway and bring her home, etc. I can't pretend that I'm fascinated by that history. I've got lots of other things going on. So I take my hat off to people who are interested in history and in those particular, that aspect of the history of our ballads. And it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole where you think about these stories and you want to connect the dots. And I understand it, and I value the research, and I really respect the research. But I can't pretend that that's my contribution. So I've long thought about where I fit in this pattern of being, am I a ballad singer? Am I a traditional singer? Or am I just somebody who likes a good tune and good chords? And which bit of all of those things is fine? My answer to it now is it's all fine. But also I probably could have spent longer in my life thinking a bit more about narrative and a bit more about why we sing these ballads. And so that was a light bulb moment for me listening to June talk about that song, and not just about that one, but about all of the ballads. And it made me think, apart from the fact that it just made me respect her even more. I think she's an outstanding singer, but I also think one of the reasons she's such a good singer is that utter belief when she's in a song like that, the utter belief in the narrative and the utter compulsion to tell that story yet again. And it's humbling, Matt. It's humbling to hear from somebody that good that they are engaging with these characters at that level, so many hundreds of years after these songs were written. So, yeah, revelation moment. And it also gave me the confidence and the inspiration, I suppose you would say, to just stop worrying about the fact that I was essentially going to sing Nick Jones's version and to get on and sing it while I still can, and to enjoy it as a piece of music while I still can, and to not get bogged down in the idea that I myself, James Fagan, have to go back into all of the books and put together yet another version using verses. That work for this song has essentially been done as far as I'm concerned, and a very, very good version of it has eventuated, and I'm really, really happy to sing it. But I'm also deeply respectful of the ongoing work and the fact that there are dozens and dozens of human beings who will never be as famous as June Tabor, who have sung this song to their families and to their children, and some of them whom have never been recorded, and that those people and the history we see in Child and Bronson, those people were the song carriers. And that is really, really crucial, and that that has allowed people like June Tabor to get so excited in the 21st century about these stories and songs. So that's why I decided to learn it.
Brilliant. It's interesting you hearing saying some of that, because when I started learning folk songs, and for a good few years later, I was, learning songs from wherever I wanted to. I was in a trio at the time. My first folk thing really was a trio that I was in, and we learned a handful of songs from Martin Carthy albums, and because Martin, made a lot of these old songs extremely singable and accessible, and so it was like, oh, I'd love to sing that one and whatever, and then you'd get people coming up to us and saying that we shouldn't be learning songs from the current sort of singers on the scene. We should be learning stuff only from the sources, the source singers, the field recordings, because that's, go back to the source. And to a certain extent, I agree with that. Don't just take one version that you hear into account. Have a look at as many as you can find.
Yep.
Find a version you like, even if it may end up being the one you originally heard, and have a look at all the versions and see what's what, see where the song's gone. But at the same time, learn what you like. And I remember I started to become a bit, not indoctrinated is not the right word, but I was starting to agree with that sentiment of only learn things from source singers, from the old singers, from the recordings of the old singers. And then I can't remember whether I was talking to John Bowden about this or I was listening to an interview with him where he said that he'd heard some people say this as well. And he said, but, every single song on the first two Spires and Bowden albums is either from Martin Carthy, Nick Jones, or Peter Bellamy. And I thought, oh yeah, so it is. Oh, yep. Oh, it's all right then. It's fine. Do what you want, Yep.
And they've inspired another couple of generations with that material, which is fantastic. I think one of the things, though, that you do miss out on if you don't dig in a bit deeper is the nuance of melody and the importance of trying to keep the tunes going, because, and I think you know what I mean by this, if you listen to Nick Jones singing Sir Patrick Spens, there are elements of the tune which absolutely grabbed my ear, and until I actually looked at Bronson. So very interestingly, Matt, I after listening to you talk to David about those tunes in Bronson for this thing, I was also looking at where Nick Jones's such important version may have come from. And actually, I think it is a genuine amalgamation of versions 1 and 2 in Bronson. And there's a particular bit in the first version, which when you sang it through, with no disrespect, you missed a very important note on the very last line.
Oh dear.
And it is the one that Nick Jones is the bit of the tune that really makes me love Nick Jones's version. And it goes, it's the last line, da 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 da. It actually goes above. It goes above the fifth, da 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 dee dum ba da dee, and it's that variation, dum dum da dee da da dum da, that I think is what made this tune. It must have been one of the reasons Nick Jones liked it, because it suited his voice. And it also distinguishes that version from version 2, which doesn't have that high note on the last line. And it's now, if you're listening to this Roud, we are nerding out. I admit it freely. We are nerding out on the intricacies, but they're important. And what
this is the place to do it.
Totally. What they translate to is actual music, and what they translate to is emotion and feeling. So these old books and these some people think they're dry and dusty. They contain human art and they contain human emotion. And this song is full of both of those things. And that tune that Nick Jones sings is actually very old. And people have been singing it with that particular melodic variation, and no doubt relishing that melodic variation for years. And I think that's beautiful. I think that is a really lovely thing. So I have tried to, in my version, keep those things, and I have gone back and looked at the tunes in Bronson before, and I haven't actually, crucially, I haven't committed my final version of this to any recording, but I was delighted to be asked to make a version of it for your podcast, which I've done. So what people will hear is my first ever attempt to sing this to tape. And it was a challenge, Matt. It was a challenge partly because I haven't really thought about this without the chords before, and I haven't really thought about it without the fact that the tune goes so well against the drone. So I recorded it twice. The first time I recorded it with a drone in my ears so that I could just get used to singing it without the bouzouki part. And then I listened back to it, and you could hear the drone, and I thought, no, Matt won't be happy with that. You could hear the drone spilling from my cans into the microphone. I said, no, do it again. But I'm really glad I did it twice, because the second time I had kind of the ghost of the drone in my muscle memory, and it really helped me do that. I think that we won't reflect too long on the actual physics and process of unaccompanied singing and pitch and all of those things. But a little bit of advice for anyone singing unaccompanied songs, especially if you have to record them or sing them, in any sort of setting where people are going to be giving you feedback, is try singing them with the drone for a while and get your muscle memory around it to a drone before you drop the drone away, because it really helps you learn the relationship between the different intervals in the tune and the home note, and solidify them in your mind. So there's my my little bit of singing tip for unaccompanied singers. Do it with a drone, even if you don't intend to use that drone later on. And then the other thing, Matt, that I found challenging about singing this was Nick Jones, I think, relishes it because of its rhythm, and he puts it into solid rhythm, and he enjoys that nature of it. And there are various ways to sing ballads, as we know, and it's all very personal. But this particular tune really takes a strong pulse.
Absolutely.
And I think it's one of the reasons it's caught on. And I think it's one of the reasons Nick Jones's version's caught on, is because the pulse is there. And even without my bouzouki or my guitar or you or anyone else playing with me, that pulse and that rhythm was very firmly in my head, and I will never be able to hear the song without it. I can't escape it. And so I can't sing this particular song freely, and nor would I intend to.
That's right. I had to go at that exact thing yesterday, and I thought, no, it's really hard actually to get, because that melody is so good, and it's I may be wrong on this. It's quite not particularly common that you get a song melody that effectively starts on the seventh of the scale. This seems quite rare to my mind. I think
it is rare.
Yeah,
I think it is rare,
and I think that's what's caught on, is that it sounds almost otherworldly in a way compared to most of the melodies you might expect from a folk song.
Yep, definitely.
Yes, and I remember I remember playing it with you at that gig in Bath, and because we hadn't rehearsed it at all, but I know the song, the melody inside out, because it's just I've known it all my life, or not all my life, but a long time, and I remember thinking, oh yeah, it's seventh, so even if going to an F, it's definitely a G chord. That's fine. And then just somehow an automatic pilot, I found myself playing putting almost an F chord in there across you doing a G chord. I thought, oh, no, not at all. Don't do that. Stop doing that now. I thought, I hope James didn't notice that. But, it's just because it's so odd to find that.
Yes.
That sort of, you get songs that are, in the Mixolydian mode, which is the flattened seventh, but you don't get them that start on that flattened seventh. The flattened seventh is the thing that adds colour to the melody, not one of the defining features of the melody.
I think you're quite right, and I think this stands out for that reason. And there will be other examples, and I'm sure some of your listeners might even send you a few examples. I might think about it myself, but for now, let's agree that this is a very unusual way for a tune to start. Indeed. And it definitely gives it an ear-catching nature, and you're drawn in immediately. Something's and to be a bit June Tabor about it, the unusual nature of the opening line definitely creates tension and makes you wonder what's about to happen. And I think that is true.
And that the A melody, as it were, the first half of the melody it's low. It's the lower half of a scale and around that flattened seventh, and then the second half goes higher and with sort of a big, bold major chord.
Yes,
and you get this sort of soaring kind of bit, and it's the fact that
which is why when I first heard it, and I was starting to think about where he got it, I assumed, and also the fact that Martin Carthy then used Nick Jones's version, etc. I assumed that Nick had created that B part, and because that is another thing that is you don't hear quite as much, is where you have a strong sense in a ballad of an A section and a B section of music, and it's quite unusual, and it's very, very, to my ear, quite a modern kind of tune because of it. And yet, that's how dance music has worked for centuries. And so it shouldn't surprise us that people have used A-B dance structure in ballads either for quite a long time. But yes, so I was amazed when I saw it written down in Bronson, and to learn that Nick Jones had not only honoured the original tune, but relished the A-B nature of it, and it's really great, isn't it? It's a fantastic tune.
Yeah, and I think that tune goes back so far, because it's version A and B in Child, but it's in version A and B in Bronson. A and B is Child, 1 and 2 in. The letters are Child, the numbers are Bronson. That's like confused.
Yes.
So yes, and that tune goes back so far because it's numbers 1 and 2 in Bronson. Yeah. Depending on which version you look at, because the second tune, which is that as well, is in a publication labeled 1818.
Yes.
But learned it from someone in 1805. So astonishing that a tune, not that we should think that these old tunes aren't any good, but astonishing to think that a tune that good is now over 200 years old.
Indeed. Yep.
And yes, as you said, and as June said, very cinematic thing. The whole ocean voyage. That's some of my favorite films involve sort of involve ocean voyages and battles at sea and that sort of thing. Films like Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, some of the best seafaring stuff put on film, I think, and it feels very cinematic in that way. And let's move on to the recommended listening, as we always do. In the first half, we recommended the older singers and the field recordings, source singers, depending on what you want to label them as. And in this half, we always recommend versions from the folk revival. I've stopped saying sort of modern recordings because the folk revival takes us from, let's say, the tail end of the 1950s through to now. So I know we've both got a handful to recommend. So actually, we've mentioned two of them already. But who have you got to recommend?
Well, I think something that your listeners will find fascinating if they don't know it already is that when you look at the tunes in Bronson for this ballad, Ewan MacColl is not only quoted as a source singer in Bronson for this ballad, which I think is brilliant. And if not, it's one of the best examples of what you were just saying, that, the distinction between source singer and revival. Maybe this is the point when you look at this, that you can put that out the window to a certain extent, because version 11, Sir Patrick Spens, recorded by Bronson, sung by Ewan MacColl on Riverside LP, from the singing of MacColl's father. I just think that is beautiful and it's brilliant. And for all of the various opinions about MacColl and his work and the way that he went about his work, more the way that I think that he spoke to people perhaps about their work, MacColl was a crucial ballad singer. And the recordings that he recorded in the late 50s and early 60s, particularly of Scottish ballads, are incredibly important, and they are not the work of a wannabe Scotsman. They have deep roots in his own Scottish ancestry, and they are learned from Scottish singers, and they're learned from his parents in many cases. And so his version, I think, is a crucial one to listen to, and was very influential in its own way. Let's not forget that Nick Jones didn't record this until 1970, and that there were 15 years of recordings out there by then on folk labels, including a couple of versions of MacColl singing Sir Patrick Spens, and his versions have influenced other singers as well. I believe David said the Fairport version was influenced probably by MacColl's version, and that wouldn't surprise me at all. So that is one to listen to, and it's also really good to remind ourselves in a world of Nick Jones's singing very simplified, plain English versions of songs, that these often Scottish ballads were written down and often sung and collected, and the continuity was in Scots. And so MacColl is a really good way for people to remember that and to enjoy the nature of this being a Scottish song. So that's my first recommendation. And the second recommendation is June Tabor, which won't surprise you, as I've already played you her talking about it. Her version, and I asked her about this, I thought she'd made up her tune and she couldn't remember exactly where she'd got it, but she emailed me the next week to say that it had been on her mind and she really wanted to get to the bottom of the mystery. So I can tell you that June took version 5 from Bronson, which was collected by Harris, attributed to Harris MS, and she used the A music. She made a 2-part tune like Nick Jones's tune, which we can call a Christie tune. She used inspired by the A music. She and Mark Emerson then wrote their own B music. So I would really recommend people hear that as well. And you've got the A music coming from Bronson's 5th collected version, and the B music by June and Mark herself. And I think this is another good lesson. If you're setting ballads yourself, you don't feel that you have to take an old tune from Bronson and stick to it religiously, but don't be afraid to use it as inspiration as well for a launching off point. And this cannot be said enough. You don't have to stick to one version. You don't have to just use one tune. We just have to be aware of what's come before us and acknowledge that we are treading in the footsteps of previous ballad creators. But they were doing the same thing, and they were using fragments and they were using sections of tune to make the thing that they wanted to do. And so I think that's a really important thing to do. And both of those versions, McColl's for its Scottish nature and for the fact that Ewan McColl, a man that we've lived in the same lifetime as, is in Bronson as a source for this song, is fantastic. And the fact that June Tabor made her own delicious version of this song and got so into the story of it. That'd be my recommendations. Absolutely.
Yeah, the Ewan McColl recording is on 3 separate albums. It's on,
that's right.
It's on the English and Scottish Popular Ballads, the Child Ballads Volume 2, which is a anthology by him and A.L. Lloyd. It's on 1961 Ewan McColl album, the English and Scottish Popular Ballads Volume 1, Child Ballads. Not to be confused with what I just said a second ago. And then an album with Peggy Seeger, Blood and Roses Volume 4 as well. And incidentally, that series of albums and Peggy Seeger will come up again in a couple of weeks on the podcast. And June Tabor's one is on... It's a 2003 album of hers called An Echo of Hooves.
Which is entirely child ballads.
There we go. I hadn't noticed that. And so it is. Ooh. I've just noticed a song that's coming up in the next season or two that I might... Maybe I'll get in touch. But yeah, so that's great. And yes, we mentioned Nick Jones earlier. I just want to say that, yeah, that's Nick Jones's first album called Ballads and Songs that came out in 1970. Track 1, side 1. And then, yeah, Martin Carthy. It took Martin a long while later to do it. He only did it about 28 years later. It's on his 1998 album, Signs of Life. And he just said he got it from Nick Jones, which is fantastic.
Well, I do wonder if that was out of deference to Nick Jones's version and the fact that Martin, was singing his version, and I think that may be one of the reasons he left it quite a long time to record. But then I think it is, if you get inside this song, it's hard to deny it, and it's hard to deny a place in your repertoire or your head because it's so good. So I can imagine that's part of the reason Martin left it a while.
Indeed, yes. He said on Martin's sleeve notes, he said, the first tune I heard of this song was from Ewan McColl and subsequently others, and the great and marvelously inventive Nick Jones, who dug out what I think is the best tune to carry that song, and which I sing here. Nick recorded it on his first album, which lies along with 80% of his recorded output and a very large chunk of the work of other 1970s musicians in a record company's maw, or should that be mausoleum? Either way, it's sad that such spring-heeled guitar playing and singing should lie unheard.
Well, not in my house. I'm holding a copy of the album right here.
I know. If you're lucky enough to have a copy, there'll be. I have a digital copy. I think. My mum might correct me on this if she listens, but that I think my dad just copied the Nick Jones LPs onto cassette a long time ago, and as we were talking about earlier, copying onto tape. I always point people towards John Boson if he's done it on a folk song a day, and so it was one of his songs in February of 2011. Sir Patrick Spens, and that's the Nick Jones one, but the Martin Carthy one, Nick Jones. And in fact, John then played on the Martin Simpson version, which again comes from Nick Jones. A lot of people, very influential, as you'd expect, Nick Jones being hugely influential to a lot of guitarists. Martin Simpson made an album in 2009 called True Stories, and Sir Patrick Spens is on there. And John Boson's playing fiddle on there. I want to point people towards Paul and Liz Davenport, who are very key figures in the sort of Yorkshire, South Yorkshire folk scene. They had made an album in 2006 called Under the Leaves, and they did it. And their version, they said, is patched together from the Motherwell and Buchan versions in Child Volume 2. So they've done a bit of as I said, a patchwork job to create something else. So that's always good to hear them. Peter Bellamy recorded it a long time ago. If I can find the bit about Peter Bellamy, it was basically on a privately issued cassette called the Maritime England Suite, which did in the end get a CD release. I've actually got an official CD copy of it. And that's an album of Peter Bellamy singing and playing the concertina with Ursula Pank on cello and Dolly Collins on piano. And it's a load of maritime songs and songs mentioning, ocean voyages and things. There's a recording of that, I think, on... Oh, I see. That was originally intended for a possible BBC radio broadcast, that album, but it didn't make it, so Peter released it privately in 1982. And I think somewhere online you can buy an actual official released CD of the Maritime England Suite, but if Peter Bellamy sang it, listen to it, because it's usually fantastic. And I'll finish off with two separate performances by Fairport Convention, which I really like the Fairport Convention version. There's a studio album from 1970 called Full House, and that's probably what I consider like the peak Fairport lineup, because it's Richard Thompson, Simon Nicol, Dave Swarbrick, Dave Pegg, Dave Mattox. That's kind of a stacked lineup, it seems. And it's on there. It's track one of side 2, and then there's a live version released when they performed all of Full House live and called it House Full. And so it's great to hear that. And that's a Dave Swarbrick singing lead vocals, which not sure how common that was for Fairport, but Dave Swarbrick sang lead on Fairport.
It was very common for a while after Sandy Denny died. Yeah, Dave was the lead singer for a couple of albums.
Oh, there you go. My knowledge of Fairport isn't as extensive as I'd like. I've been diving.
You can't cover everything, Matt.
This is true. I've been listening to a lot more Steel Ice Band recently, and I've not yet done the same with Fairport, but I will do eventually. Anyway, so there's two. Although it's officially released and recorded on Fairport's Full House, they did actually record it a year later during the Legion Leaf sessions with Sandy Denny singing lead, but they left it out, and it didn't see the light of day for a long time. And it's a bonus track on the 2002 CD reissue of Legion Leaf. So there's a Sandy Denny lead version and a Dave Swarbrick lead version for Fairport Convention. And I think that's at least almost 10 recommendations. We'll leave that there, and we'll bring this whole thing into a close. This has been absolutely fantastic, and I'm very grateful to you for giving your time and to this, and to share your thoughts on such a fantastic ballad.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for asking me. And it's really helped me consolidate my relationship with the song, and I just can't wait to sing it again, because it's brilliant. It's a brilliant ballad, and it's a brilliant tune for a great song. So thank you for involving me.
That's quite all right, and I was honoured. I think you said that, because I booked you for the folk club that I run in Sheffield, the New Musical Traditions Club. You played our very first one as a solo gig. And am I right in thinking that was back in March of this year? And am I right in thinking that was the first time you'd ever performed Sir Patrick Spens?
You're quite right. That was its debut in my care, and I'm glad it was in your club.
Yes, I was very honoured for that. And yes, I'm sure we'll have you back at some point on In the Roud, or In the Roud on Patreon as well. There's scope for other appearances as the podcast goes on. But in the meantime, James Fagan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Oh, the king, he sits in Dunfermline town, drinking the blood-red wine. Oh, where can I get a good mariner to sail 7 ships of mine? Then up and spoke a fine young man, sitting at the king's right knee. Sir Patrick Spens is the best mariner to ever sail on the sea. So the king has written a broad letter, and he signed it in his own hand. hand, and he sent it away to Sir Patrick Spens, who was walking along the Strand. Well, the very first line Sir Patrick read, a little grin gave he, and the very next line Sir Patrick read, well, a salt tear filled his eye. Oh, who is it this deed has done and told a tale on me? For I never was a good mariner, and I never intend to be. Oh, late yestreen I saw the new moon with the old moon in her arms. I fear, a deadly storm our ship will come to harm. But rise up, my merry men, all for our little ship she sails in the morn. Whether it's windy, or whether it's fair, or whether there's a deadly storm, they hadn't been sailing a league or more, a league but barely 9, when the wind and wet and the snow and sleet came a-blowing from behind. Oh, where can I get a good ship's boy to take the helm in hand, so that I might climb to the topmast high and see if I can't spy land? Come down, Sir Patrick Spens, for I fear that we all must die. For in and out of the good ship's hull the wind and the ocean fly. Well, the very first step that Sir Patrick took, the salt water came to his knee, and the very next step that Sir Patrick took, he's drowned it all in the sea. It's many were the fine feather bed came a-floating on the foam, and it's many more were the little lord's sons who never more came home. Oh, long may the ladies sit with their fans all in their hands, until they see Sir Patrick Spens come a-sailing along the Strand. It's 50 miles to Aberdeen shore, 50 fathoms deep. It's there does lie Sir Patrick Spens with the little lords at his feet.
That was James Fagan singing Sir Patrick Spens. And that brings us to the end of the episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on this song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch with me, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk, or visit the podcast on various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. Also, if you are enjoying the podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. That really helps to reach a wide audience for the podcast and spread the love of traditional song. Over on our Patreon, we are now in the middle of another Singer's Choice mini-season, this time with returning singer guest Kirsty Law. Kirsty was on the podcast in the previous season for her episode on the Two Brothers. But I'm very glad that she's now on the Patreon and we can have 3 songs of her own choosing, consequently from anywhere in the Roud Index. And none so more demonstrated by last week's Patreon episode with her. We had the first of her 3 choices, and that was Roud 2272, the Scots song Green Grow the Rashes O, and history provided by returning podcast guest Joe Miller too. If you feel so moved to support the podcast financially, then please do head on over to patreon.com/intheroud, and you can sign up for either £5 or £10 per month and receive regular bonus content. This week's Patreon episode, which comes out tomorrow, that's Thursday the 2nd of October, we have the second of Kirsty's 3 song choices. We will be looking at Roud number 8702, As I Came In by Fisherow, with history from returning podcast guest Steve Byrne. Sign up to hear this and much more besides at patreon.com/intheroud. In the Roud is a media partner to Veteran, the traditional music label. This week's song, Sir Patrick Spens, is included on just one of their releases. That's an album called Put Another Log on the Fire, where it's sung by Duncan Williamson. You can find this album and more on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, David Atkinson and James Fagan. Join me next week for episode 2 of this season. We will be looking at Roud number 42, which is Child Ballad 62, and that's the song Fair Annie. My history guest will be Sandra Kerr, and it's a return visit to the singer guest chair for Debbie Armour. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.